Today on How to Change the Conversation, we're here with Warrior.Insights, aka Mark. You might know him from fighting in the deep trenches of some TikTok comment sections or from his Twitch streams. How's it going today?
I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
Good. Summer's finally starting. I don't have to deal with 20-degree weather when I wake up. It's pretty amazing. Of course, you don't know that in California. I bet it's a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it's crazy. It's like when people come here from like northern or like very colder parts of the climate, they'll see people in like California, it'd be like 60 degrees and everyone's layered up. Like it's really like when it hits 60 over here, it's really cold for us.
Oh, it's like when Texas got like one like inch of snow and they like almost destroyed the entire infrastructure of the state because they
Yeah.
just weren't prepared for it. But as I
Yeah,
referenced, you are a TikTok creator, and yeah, I do think that was funny to reference. I feel like in a lot of your TikToks, you always go for the, well, your personal take, but it's usually against like the status quo for like young people on TikTok, because on there they seem really radicalized, where the biggest voice is usually the minority opinion. So yeah, I do say we do usually find you fighting with a lot of people on TikTok. How do you describe, like, how does that go through?
it's t- for me. I never really wanted to do it in regards to like I'm gonna make a TikTok and I'm just gonna jump into it. For me, I started off just making a blog where it's like, okay, let me just write about the current events. Let me try to explain it. It started off on LinkedIn. It's still there. I just haven't written it in a while. But for me, I ended up realizing, okay, no one's gonna go on LinkedIn and read this. I've gotten some people, but yes, but everyone's on TikTok. So I'm like, you know what? Let's just go to where they are. And when I opened it up, I mean, I was just morbidly, well, surprised at how bad it is. I mean, here's the thing, and I always say this up front. It's like I have friends that I disagree with in regards to geopolitics. That's fine. But the problem is when it comes to TikTok, I found this out as a content creator. You have 3 seconds to grab their attention. If you are radical, insane, or crazy, it will push your content out because it catches attention. But if you're not, it doesn't do as good.
What inspired you to start sharing political content on TikTok? Like, what, and at the end goal, what is the message that you hope to convey to your audience?
I mean, for me, it's just ultimately in the end, it's like there can be reasonable, rational decisions being made. When it comes to warfare and geopolitics, I think one of the biggest issues that I've been seeing from the Ukraine war, Israel, Palestine, that there's a good guy versus bad guy. It's treated like, from the conversations and dialogue I've seen, as if it's a sport, like my side versus your
Like
side.
it's all black
But in
and white.
reality, exactly, it's very, very complicated. Like, honestly, this conflicts are always complicated. I have my own biases into each and every conflict. I try my best not to let that get in the way, but over on social media, it's gotten to an extreme point where it's gotten to the point where there's certain words that I can't say because I know this is gonna be on like different platforms. But like, it's gotten to the point where it's that bad, where it's like people are openly, anti-Semitic. People are openly anti, like, people are racist. Like, it's gotten that bad.
And then how do you navigate the challenge of you have to turn like a very complex political issue, especially when you're talking about Israel, like the one of the most complex issues of our time, into short TikTok videos while maintaining like the level of accuracy that you hope to have? Like, what are challenges that come with that?
It's just that 3 second rule. So starting out with TikTok, you have 3 seconds to grab somebody's attention. If you don't go with those 3 seconds, it's just dead in the water. So for me, I had to start shifting my content. Okay, let me just do a news article and a cat like on it, and that's gotten some attention, which is it's worked. But then there are some where it's like, okay, this is obviously isn't working. But what I've started to learn and realize, if I start stitching, if I start like, let them speak, then I take over. I feel like that's worked out the best. And for me, it's not necessarily conveying my message, but it's kind of correcting. I think I forgot her name. She's a psychologist. But on TikTok, it pushes, psychology says this. And for me, it's like, let me just use that format. I'm like, really? And like, I kind of bring up points. One of the biggest ones was when the U.S. first started dropping aid into Gaza. One of the biggest things that I heard is that it was 38,000 meals that were expired. Well, then I actually looked into it, and like, even in the Twitter that claimed it, it said it over there that it was expired in 2026. It even had a comment, and all the other comments that people were writing under were very upset because this person was lying. And the person said, I didn't even take the photo as a way to cop out. But here was a problem with TikTok. The second content creators saw that, they were pushing it out as fast as they possibly can to try to jump on the trend to get those views, likes, and comments. And as a result, it just went all over the place. In my TikTok, I stitched the video, and once I'm pretty sure she saw it because the second I clicked it, I think on my stream, I clicked it, she deleted it, or I can't even see it anymore.
Yeah, I always see like you always see like those big like misinformation things that happen on TikTok because you're just trying to make the biggest story possible. What are your processes for researching and fact checking before creating content so you know that like stuff like that doesn't happen to you?
Yeah, so for me, I think like one of the biggest challenges that I have, and don't get me wrong, I might mess up every once in a while. Probably, honestly, like just the bare bones basic of Google, and then I start going into social media. Those two, honestly, have been the biggest blows in regards to. I don't need to go any further. However, if I need to go even deeper than that, Google Scholar, it might not be the best, but it's free, and I keep mispronouncing this. JSTOR, JSTOR. Those two I kind of use if it's really really in depth. If they really have a good argument, I go there.
How do you personally measure the impact of your political content? Like, what do you strive to do with your time on the platform?
Yeah, so from what I'm seeing, content creators honestly have a very, very short shelf life. Like they're not there forever. I mean, one of growing up, I would watch like Game Theory, and he actually retired.
Yeah.
So for me, I can imagine at least 3, 4, 5 years. At this point, at least trying to get like some sort of a community dialogue, open discussion, and then maybe kind of transfer it out. But ultimately, in the end, for me, it's just trying to push and create some sort of community, get my name out there to the point where I can actually start getting into the weeds of like what my research was. So, as a side note, um one of the biggest reasons why I got motivated to get put my stuff out there was because I graduated Johns Hopkins in a degree in government, but most of my classes were focused on defense policy and security studies. So I was mostly focused on that. And for me, just getting on TikTok, seeing people have a very vague understanding as to what it is, that's what really motivated me to get on there.
To close the book of our discussion today on TikTok, what is your personal take on TikTok possibly being removed as we're seeing right now in the news?
So this is pretty interesting. So for me, when I do my streams, I normally rely on TikTok. Okay, what is everyone talking about? Let's talk about it. But now, like the app is now in panic mode, where it's pushing all the content creators to start trying to call the representatives. What was interesting is that I believe the first panel, it included Democratic senators, not senators, Democratic and Republican representatives. The first initial vote was 50-0. Everybody in that room agreed that needs to be divested. And for me, like they had access to classified information. I want to know what, like, for me personally, what was that information that made everybody go 50-0? Because that alone is kind of like alarming. Now it's passing up. I believe it passed the House. Now it's going to go to the Senate. For my personal views, I honestly do think that this ban should go through. Not necessarily because of the content, but because of the fact that there have been security issues in regards to China. So TikTok, the parent company's ByteDance, it's based in China. But one of the biggest problems is that there's no private enterprise in China, and that most companies within China have some form of connection to the Chinese Communist Party. So as a result, one of the major concerns with TikTok is that it can collect not only your data, but to have some sort of a database that can be accessed by the Chinese government, which has been a major concern. And for me, I think one of the biggest pieces of evidence that kind of supports that was the initial years when TikTok first started to develop, was it had Talk, like it had a section for military people. So if you wore your uniform, like it will push your content out. But what a lot of people were kind of oblivious or unaware was that they would like kind of like do a short TikTok in uniform, but behind them they had a lot of information that could be kind of like analyzed by Chinese agents or any other foreign or non-state actor entity.
And then what do you say to the people that think that this could lead to like a slippery slope of policies or legislation being pushed against apps that don't really work like in America, where if there's like a general safety concern about them, they can just get rid of them. And then other people saying, well, is this against like free speech on the app, or is this against this? So like, what's your defense for those conversations?
So major representatives within the House, Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of them. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was one of them. They were both pushing out that this was a free speech violation, that they didn't want the government to interfere. I agree with that. I mean, I am very pro free speech. The issue is not necessarily if the government is restricting an individual's right to free speech. The issue is that TikTok has ties to ByteDance, which is in a foreign company, which does cause national security interests. I mean, it's more black. Like, this is honestly a very gray matter in regards to the law. I'm curious to see how it will be pushed up and how it will be kind of interpreted, because I don't believe that the government should like have that power or restriction to limit free speech. But also at the same time, just in regards to TikTok, we are looking at the national security concerns. that have been present and that have been raised as a concern.
Speaking of politics, the year is 2024, so everyone knows now we're entering a very, very controversial election year with both sides being very adamant of either loving their candidate or hating their candidate. From both sides, we see it. What are the key issues that you think will dominate the discourse in this upcoming election?
Definitely, Israel and Palestine is definitely one of them. I know with the Democrats, especially with President Joe Biden, they are hurting really, really bad in regards to most of their progressive voter base being extremely upset over what's been going on. With the Republican Party, there have been some contention or issues with Donald Trump running again. I know for a fact foreign policy is going to be one of the biggest ones because Ukrainian funding for Ukraine has been a major hot button issue for most Republicans. That Donald Trump said it himself that he wants a deal brokered. Another major issue is with Israel Palestine, as mentioned. I know that for a fact. Those are the two biggest ones, and the border security that has also been somewhat of raised alarm or concern. I mean, given the fact that before 2016, when Donald Trump ran, he did raise up the concern about the security within the southern border. However, his rhetoric can be seen as divisive or interesting. However, what's been interesting to note is that we're seeing a massive wave of influx of individuals from different regions. One of them being China, where we're having a vast amount of immigration from people from China trying to escape China from using different routes and alternatives. That's another one. I know. And then lastly is the economy. Everyone, in my opinion, whether you're Democrat or Republican, the understanding of how the economy functions is very, very vague because they believe that if a certain president was in office, it would kind of magically fix things. With Donald Trump, he is leveraging the fact that under his term, things were quote unquote better other than President Biden. However, with President Biden, he can argue that during 2020, he did a successful job in recovery and has been doing somewhat of a decent job so far. The numbers are backing it up, but it's just the outlook and the kind of the pessimism around it, especially with inflation. That's honestly the biggest one that I think Donald Trump is going to push against President Biden.
So the big issues that you point towards are the Ukrainian war, the Israel war, and then the economy. What do you think that each party's plan of attack do you think are going to be for those issues?
Could you repeat the last statement again?
So we had economy, the Ukrainian war, Israel and Gaza. What do you think of each candidate? What do you think is there going to be their plan of attack for attacking these issues?
Right. Well, with President Biden, the State of the Union address, the way he presented it out is just going to be flat out as it is. He wants to secure the southern border. It wants to support Israel and Israel right to defend itself against from Hamas. But what was also interesting is in the State of the Union address, he advocated for a two-state solution, and that I found very interesting. That hasn't been heard of in a while, at least into my regards. I know for a fact when President Trump ran in 2016, he actually referred to Palestine as a country. And that, if you look into the YouTube comments, they actually praised him for that. In regards to President Biden's strategy, currently right now, we are somewhat seeing the effects. U.S. aid being dropped into Gaza, a temporary port being built into Gaza, and pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet to try to either conduct a ceasefire up negotiations or try to curtail or stop everything altogether. That's one example. I know with the Ukrainian war, they are pushing for more funding, as much as possible. However, things are starting to get a little more complicated. I remember a few months ago that there was a very massive corruption scandal where the money that was supposed to go ended up going somewhere else. So that has been an issue cause for concern for sending in monetary relief. In regards to the economy, I'm not quite sure. I did have discussions on streams with other individuals that are kind of in the same content creating sphere as I am. I know President Biden did mention about credit cards. That was one of them. When it comes to President Trump, he is definitely going to use these last 4 years in a way to attack President Biden's on his perceived failure. And so when it comes to Israel Palestine, with President Trump's former President Trump's base being mostly conservative Christian Republicans who do see this, who are very, very strong supporters of Israel, he even said it himself that he's going to let Israel, quote, finish the job. So whatever that means, whether he is all okay with the final assault on Rafah, it is yet to be seen. But President Trump's stance has always been to strongly support Israel, which in a sense could help in regards to his funding from IPAC or other organizations that are very friendly towards Israel. In regards to the Ukraine war, that's going to be very interesting because he has been very adamantly opposed to it, where he says he wants a deal broker between those President Putin, President Putin and Zelensky to stop the fighting. And in regards to the economy, I feel that President Trump will probably use those last 4 years in terms to say things were better under me. And here's the thing: when it comes to organizing and activism, I used to be a former activist. The thing is that you can throw quotes and statistics, but what was the feeling around it? And in regards to social media, you have a lot of individuals saying, "Hey, back when he was back in those 4 years, things were quote better." However, I would also argue that come 2020, the pandemic hit, and everyone's been kind of on the funky side after that.
Yeah, and there's always going to be the big claim of whenever Biden went into office, he was known for signing multiple executive orders, a few of them being loosening the security around the border. And now the end of his campaign's coming up, and now he's trying to strengthen the border security. How do you view, like, what do you think is going to be the general population's outlook on that?
Given the fact that President Trump has been very, very strong on border security, that was actually one of his biggest campaign promises within 2016. I feel like that's going to be President Biden's major weakness. I know when during the State of the Union address was watching on my feed, the second he was bringing it up, a lot of Republicans were very, very upset over that because of what's been going on. Initially, I would argue that it was to kind of like go against the prior administration, but unfortunately, what's been going on now with China going into deflation, other countries are kind of collapsing. Now everyone's trying to get into America for safety and security. As a result, the border is completely wide and exposed. With President Trump, because that was his former stance, he can kind of ride on the curtails of that, saying, look at what President Biden did. With President Biden, I can definitely see him argue that he's going to do the best he can. However, he could also argue politics. In my opinion, I personally see that President Trump would have a stronger case than President Biden.
And then when it comes to both sides right now, what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses coming from both parties? Like, what are Trump's strengths and weaknesses, and then what are Biden's?
Yes. With President Biden's strengths, I could definitely see that the fact that I don't know why he doesn't talk about this, because when he took office, it was during COVID. And so from 2020 up until 2021 and 2022, his main thing has been the recovery, which has been great. When you compare it to other nations that have took a massive hit because of COVID, America was able to slightly recover. Granted, things are kind of off, I would argue, but at the end of the day, we did recover compared to other nations. When it comes to the Republicans' strength, I do feel like they have I want to say stronger case, but given the fact that public opinion has been going on the decline for Ukraine, they could definitely use that to their advantage. For the Democrats' weakness in regards to this, the problem is for the past 4 years under the President Biden administration, anything that went wrong will be labeled against them. So with the Afghanistan withdrawal, Israel-Palestine, Ukraine war, I know for a fact that the Republicans will hammer him on this. However, I've also seen arguments that this was President Trump's, the underlying causes happened during President Trump's term, and I was just kicking the can down the road. When it comes to the Republicans' weaknesses, I know one thing personally for me, this is where my own bias steps in, but I know for a fact when it comes to social issues with abortion, LGBT rights, I think a lot of conservatives or Republicans really do underestimate the fact that our society has evolved to be vastly different than it was before. I know after abortion, when the midterms came by, Republicans got hit pretty significantly hard. And now with 2024 coming along, it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in regards to this social issues, because most Republicans are very socially conservative, but a vast majority of individuals, especially Gen Z, Gen Alpha, millennials, they're not even remotely, to my knowledge, not remotely aligned with those values anymore.
And then I want to start asking everyone I have coming on this question, who do you give the slight edge to right now? Because when you look at the polls, it's like neck and neck. Who do you think has the slight edge in this election year right now?
I would give the argument that President Trump has the slighter edge, not necessarily because of what he's doing, but because of what's in President Biden's camp. So during 2016, you had the never Trumpers that promised we'll never vote for Trump, but granted, it didn't have that much of an impact. However, now with President Biden and the progressive vote that they're very upset over what happened with regards to Israel and Palestine, they've been doing some decent damage. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was the state of Illinois. They had 100,000 undecided voters, and they're going to continue to push that. Now, granted, the progressive vote might not be as strong right now, but having that big of an impact might be the difference in some districts.
Yeah, I feel like that it's going to be like that up until like the primaries, right? Like we're going to see that, but like I feel like once it comes down to like those two, big people. I mean, hey, Robert F. Kennedy's about to announce his running mate. Maybe we'll see three people on
Yeah,
that candidate. But I
it'll
think
be
when it
interesting to
comes to
see.
that, they'll rather die than do that.
Mhm.
But to switch away, we have mentioned Israel and Gaza a few times. If you just want to give us a quick summary on like what's your, well, not a quick one, it's a very complex issue, but like
Yeah.
what's your view on this?
I have to say, honestly, I think TikTok has completely destroyed the discourse on it, because one of the biggest issues that a lot of politicians have been trying to figure out and work is, well, how are we going to reconcile the differences? I know when I was undergoing my studies, I did bump into the Balfour Declaration, the Psycho-Pikes Agreement. There are some things that I didn't learn up until that program. And for me, I'm like, okay, I can see why people are upset over it, given the fact what's been going on now, it honestly has been madness in regards to the political discord, because following October 7th, the discord has just been messy all over, because rather than talking about how are we going to solve this issue in dealing with a radical insurgent group with Hamas, now it's just trying to argue the legitimacy of the nation state of Israel, where now they're just pushing history going back, going back, going back. Oh, it's before 1948. Oh, it's before 1914 with the Balfour Declaration, going back even further and further. And while granted that could be an argument, I don't think it's probably conducive. You also see on TikTok very radical solutions. I think I see one where it's like, oh, decolonize, like everyone who's Israeli needs to go back. And for me, it's like there are people that have been born there and stayed there. Like I've seen impossible solutions like that. Now that being said, I've had friends that are pro-Palestine that actually have like more moderate solutions in regards to all this. For me, in regards to my own opinion, and it's not a reflection upon anyone else's, for me, in regards to this whole situation, I think one of the biggest mistakes was Hamas allowing to conduct that. So, if I had a magic wand and like try to fix the solution right now, I would honestly say, look, after the whole West Bank situation, Israel needs to go in, occupy the region. I know Benjamin Netanyahu ended up saying that he was going to go in and maintain security. I can definitely see an argument for that, because honestly, like the whole thing is destroyed. So Israel needs to go in, repair it, and control the region, eliminate Hamas and the PIJ. And over in the West Bank, I would honestly argue just to leave them alone and just kind of stabilize that region. Um, in regards to eradicating Hamas, this is kind of interesting. It's an insurgent group, so it hides among the people. I mean, people like, again, online discourse has been so messy in regards to this. What people don't understand is that Hamas has been documented to use human shields, but every insurgent group has done that in regards to just the basic fundamentals of insurgent warfare or unconventional warfare, counterinsurgent. So in this case, we're talking about Israel. So Israel has a responsibility to not be disproportionate with its tactics. Like it has to be responsible for the civilians. It needs to make sure that it's like proportionate. What the issue with Hamas is that they're going into hospitals, schools, goading Israel to hit them, and as a result, we're seeing a vast majority of more civilians dying. I mean, I'll give you an example. I think after October 7th, they drone striked an insurgent in a refugee camp, but unfortunately killed 50 civilians. And so that's the unfortunate situation that you're kind of dealing with. I know there's a triad. I forgot what scholar argued this, but there is a triad in regards to counterinsurgent warfare. So you can either look after the safety and security of your own soldiers, the safety and security of the population, and eradicate the insurgent force. You can only pick two out of the three. And so currently, right now, what we're seeing going on, unfortunately, because of the situation, now that Israel is trying to effectively eliminate Hamas, trying to maintain its own soldiers not being killed. But as a result, unfortunately, the civilian population, there hasn't been much regards to that. And, granted, while this is a blanket statement, things are obviously way more complicated as it is. I know, like, the Flower Massacre was one of them, where they try to send trucks in and then they fired warning shots by their own admission. And then they release the drone footage and they see, like, hundreds of people dying trying to get the aid. So you have that instance.
What are the primary challenges for the IDF when in conducting urban warfare operations and within like the one of the most densely populated areas like the Gaza and the West Bank?
What are the biggest challenges for the IDF? They have not faced a warfare. To my knowledge, they have not faced urban warfare like this. You look back in its history, it has dealt with its neighboring countries in conventional warfare, but we're talking about urban unconventional warfare, and this is one of the biggest problems. So when it came to South Africa, if we go back to the ICJ's ruling, South Africa, one of the strongest cases was that they were making the place uninhabitable for the civilians in Gaza. However, one of the counter arguments that Israel has said in the ICJ ruling, I think a few days later, was that this is urban warfare. This is a new phenomenon that the IDF has to face. And unfortunately, most of the IDF forces primarily consist of reserves and reservists who weren't as, I wouldn't say as adequately trained, but they weren't prepared for this type of warfare. So as a result, what ends up happening with the initial weeks of the invasion, there were a lot of, as callous as it sounds, like a lot of mistakes that were being made. So for example, 3 of the hostages unfortunately being killed, that was one of them. You also have other instances where little disregard to civilian life, just stuff like that. That's just one example. Like on a tactical level, that's what they have to worry about. Now they have to go into the urban areas. They have to go and eradicate Hamas without, wouldn't say without, but trying to minimize the damage of the civilian population, which is going to be hard to find. Mao Zedong, he was probably, the founding person of the People's Republic of China. He kind of said it best that the insurgent is the fish. Wait, was the gorilla is the fish, the people are at sea. And here's the problem with this is like, with counterinsurgent forces, they have to be very, very careful to try to minimize the damage. The IDF has so far done, they've gotten better, but the initial few weeks of the invasion, things were kind of obviously messy in a sense. Now, that's on the tactical level. When we're looking at the operational level, Israel's not doing the best job because compared to Hamas or Palestine, in regards to their social media campaigns, the PR campaigns, just pushing it out, they're doing a way more effective job than Israel. Because unfortunately, what's been going on is that, I mentioned this before on TikTok and on my streams, information comes out faster than we can verify it. As a result, what's been going on and what we're seeing is that there are a lot of videos that are being pushed out of a lot of war crimes, civilian deaths, and Israel is doing the best it can to try to like counteract it. There have been some instances of like, oh, well, this video is fake. For example, let's take the Al-Shifa hospital, I believe that's what it was, where it was bombed by the IDF. When it initially came out, everybody got upset. People, like a few embassies were burned down, to my knowledge, and as a result, what ended up happening was IDF looked horrible. Granted, few days as things kind of calmed down, it was a PIJ rocket that misfired, and it didn't blow up the hospital, blew up the parking lot. But by the time that was released, the damage was already done.
Yeah, we see that a lot. Like there's a lot of videos that will come out, and the videos will always come out before the actual information does. So I feel like when it comes, and there isn't a very strong campaign, like we just now have like what, community notes on Twitter, but there's going to be people who see the main story before they ever see that community note. How do you feel like the battle, like how do you ever even that playing field between misinformation and actually correcting the information?
It's really it's honestly so hard, because the problem, and another reason why personally I don't like TikTok, there were a lot of pro-Palestinian content creators. They were scrolling through TikTok, they will find somebody dead, like actually being like killed. And so for me, I remember scrolling through, and there's this girl, like she's actually crying, like they're cry bullies and they're crying. We can talk about that another time. But this girl was actually like hysterical, like I saw a kid like his head was squished as like a tomato. I'm like, what? And then I looked, like, yeah, an idea. Well, not that it makes it any better, but unfortunately the kid was already dead, and you see a tank just roll through. I'm like, ugh. You also see some photos being released of, children unfortunately dying, limbs being blown off, like really horrific things that people just aren't prepared to like seeing. That makes it very difficult, because now it becomes emotionally charged, because when you see, it's so different, with the Ukraine war, one of the biggest key moments, like the Ukraine war was going to be the start of information warfare. Because I remember in a panel that Johns Hopkins hosted, I asked the question of what's going to be the effect of social media moving forward. Because what we're seeing in the Ukraine war, it had a dramatic impact. This is the first, quote, world war where you could see everything happening full time. So you can see people dying. You can see, drones being shot. You're seeing everything real time. In regards to what's going on in Gaza, what's making things more difficult for the IDF operationally is that you're seeing a lot of civilians starving, people dying. When US dropped aid into Gaza, you can see, like, I think it was a few days ago, you can see a crate smush, like, kill somebody. And so that makes it difficult to fight misinformation, because once you have that narrative, like, you have the video footage, you'll have the evidence, but now pushing it forward, now you can push the narrative even further. Now, not only that, but we also have AI, and that's going to be the biggest concern, because AI images were actually pushed out as well. But the thing is, AI is still at the infancy stages. You can notice a few things, but I guarantee you, give it 5 years from now, AI is going to be so perfective we can't even tell what's the difference.
Yeah, I've had a discussion about that before where I was like, I thought with technology, the idea was behind like, concerning the justice system. I thought that as technology advanced, the justice system would also advance in like successfulness because you would think that as technology gets better, we would be better able to find out DNA, find out all this stuff. But I feel like it's more like a bell curve where we had very bad technologies and like very bad DNA testing. So we saw a lot of failure with that. Then we got to actual DNA testing, fingerprinting, being able to see cameras. But now we're getting to a point where it's like, well, camera footage could be faked. You know, DNA, maybe we'll get to a point where even that could maybe be falsified. So it's going to be very difficult, I feel like, to see how that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think so. It was probably the Iraq War, I believe. So I forgot what this was. There was a doc. They had this technology that battlefield commanders and the coalition in Iraq, they can see any and all information. That this was gonna quote eliminate the fog of war. So fog of war is like this unknown of like decisions that you're gonna make as a military commander. So let's say, for instance, let's just bring it down to something everybody knows. Let's say you ask a girl or a guy on a date, "Hey, do you want to go on a date with me?" You don't know if they like you, but you're just gonna ask it just to see what's going on. With military commanders, they have to make certain decisions in the battlefield without having the full scope of the picture. That being said, this device was supposedly trying to eliminate that fog of war to get them to understand. What ended up happening, it made it way worse because they got every single bit of information. And obviously, as humans, we can't process all of that. So commanders were overwhelmed with information. And I feel like in regards to like evidence, videos, as technology is getting progressing, now it's just more further challenges along the road. Because now, let's say for instance, North Korea. It's conventional army. It's not going to do anything. Most of the individuals in this country are starving to death. However, they have something called the Lazarus Group. These are elite hackers. These are one of the best hackers in the world. North Korea will send its people up to not Beijing. They'll send them up to China. Then they come down, and then they're in Pyongyang, and they're one of the best hacking groups in the world. They've stolen millions of cryptocurrency, and that's just an example right there. As technology is progressing, it is sort of like kind of evening out the playing field for other state and non-state actors. And like Ukraine is an example of this, where they don't have an air force compared to Russia, but they have drones, and it's actually kind of evening out somewhat.
Yeah, we're getting a little off the rails. Let's try to turn. I'm gonna try to turn it
Yeah.
back to Israel. I was like, we're going down a really cool rabbit
Yeah,
hole.
no, 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 it's fine,
Which,
it's fine.
if I think if we go down this rabbit hole, we'll be here for the next 2 hours. Speaking of like what could
Yes.
happen, but one of the big issues with Israel is they don't want to acknowledge the right of return of Palestinians, and they try to say that well they can't acknowledge all of them with everything that's happened in 1948 with the Nakba, the revolt, right? What do you think? Do you think it's their personal prerogative to help bring back Palestinians to the land that is considerably theirs, or do you think it's too late for that, or do you like how do you view that?
I'll be honest. I mean, even for me, I'm still there's so much research in regards to being all this being done, especially with like now I can't just like go on here. I have to like even with the amount of research that I've done, I can't give you a fair and accurate conclusion without letting my bias get in the way. But that being said, given the fact that what has happened following October 7th, I cannot see Israel just immediately having that right of return. Like I felt that October 7th from that point forward is sort of this catalyst of like there's no like this is the point of no return. Like we are going to make sure that we are safe as a nation. I kind of give it like this prisoner's dilemma. Like if you're not familiar with it, you take two people, they committed a crime, but you separate them, and the dilemma is this: if both of you say you're guilty, you both get the harsher, like you have additional penalties to your punishment. If you both say you're innocent, then you kind of like, then you're both free. But if one rats on the other, that person gets free and the other person gets dinged, and as vice versa. And so what's kind of when you bring that sort of game theory into this, with regards to Israel and Palestine, both both entities are unaware of what the other one's going to do. So I cannot see Israel in good standing, in good faith, trying to let that go because they're looking for their own safety and security because they have other internal and external threats now to worry about.
Yeah, we see that a lot. And then back to it, I know we talked about the warfare tactics on Israel's side, but now I want to switch to Hamas and other jihadist organizations. How effective is asymmetrical warfield tactics when we talk about tunnels and guerrilla warfare, like, and what's what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq? Like, why are these so successful whenever we see them in action?
Well, it's interesting because there's always a paradox in regards to insurgent warfare that I've noticed. The more, like, the bigger and the more resource and supplied a counterinsurgent force is, the better it is for insurgent groups. Um, so I've been having a lot of discuss. Well, discussions as before, like a lot of individuals will bring up that America could not win in Afghanistan, it could not win in Vietnam. Those two countries alone, the dense, like for Vietnam, it's dense forests, the jungles made it impossible for a standing military to just plow its way through. That's why they had Agent Orange come in. When Afghanistan, the Soviet Union, even they couldn't control the whole entire area because it was mountainous and hilly. Like again, the standing army couldn't go through. When it comes to unconventional warfare and like insurgent warfare, they use the terrain to their advantage. And when it came to tunnel warfare, I mean, here's the thing: Hamas is not the first group to do this. The Chinese Communist forces during World War II, when the Japanese invaded China, they were using tunnel warfare to kind of give fight against the Japanese aggressors in the country. And when it came to Israel and Palestine, Hamas, they're using the tunnels not as a way as a like backup. They're also using it as command posts. They were using it to store the hostages over there. And there have been combat footage of IDF forces going in, but are completely unaware of the tunnel networks of how vast and deep it is, where they're having people just pop up out of nowhere and trying to like suicide bomb them or hit them. Um, I would argue that one of the reasons why insurgent warfare has been so effective against, states like America or Israel is because it's kind of like the yin to their yang, where it's like it's perfectly aligned to their strategy in the opposite direction. Where America, they have a 3-to-1 ratio where it's like they want to hit with overwhelming force, but instead with insurgent groups they kind of do the opposite. It's not necessarily they'll hit you with overwhelming force; they'll just chip you slowly one at a time. To where we had the point in Afghanistan where we've been in for 20 years, and as a result, had to unfortunately withdraw.
Yeah, with the withdrawal, we did see how that like went badly, and you did talk about how that you can kind of blame both parties for that, with Donald Trump kicking the can down the road because he didn't incorporate the Afghani government in the talks, and with Biden doing the pullout, how we saw how badly that went. Where do you feel like the blame lies in the pullout of Afghanistan? If you had to like say like which party made the worst decision diplomatically and with public relations?
Right. I will say this, this is my own opinion, not anyone else's, this is my own analysis. The way and how quick it was done, I'd honestly have to say this is like looking at this situation, I'd have to say both sides did have to take responsibility for that. Because with President Donald Trump during his term, he was speaking of a pullout, but really didn't include the Taliban or the Afghani governments when it talks, given how fast it was. And with President Biden, while it happened under his command, everything just spiraled out of control so quickly. The Taliban, whether you liked it or not, if we were going to pull out of, well, we already did, but pulling out of Afghanistan meant that the Taliban would come in and overthrow the Afghan government. They had to be, everyone needed to have a diplomatic discussion. But here's the catch of it all. If you did like had any sort of diplomatic talks with the Taliban, it would look bad politically and would never they would never let it go. So if it happened under President Trump, the Democrats would use it against him, and if it happened with President Biden, the Republicans would have used that against him. So as a result, that is kind of one of our weaknesses in regards to being a democracy, where their politics does get involved in a bureaucracy. Honestly, the best, and well, given the fact that it's hindsight now, one of the biggest and best solutions would have been to include Taliban within the talks to find a way to slowly pull out at a time. Now, thanks to the immediate withdrawal, as a result, unfortunately, what everyone's seeing going on, that millions of dollars left of U.S. equipment was there, and like that's one of the biggest drawbacks. Now that China has a good cooperation with the Taliban, one of the biggest security concerns that has been noted is that the Taliban could ship that equipment off to Beijing, where they can kind of reverse engineer it to find ways to like counter against U.S. Rifles and ballistic armor.
Yeah, you can really see a comparison here between fighting in like different, like as you said, insurgent like wars with like Afghanistan and the Taliban and like Hamas. Like, why is it so challenging to face when it comes to these organizations versus a country of its own, as we see today?
With insurgent warfare, it's a lot more different than conventional warfare because insurgents hide among the people, and that's what makes it so difficult and tricky. The goal of so when we look at like World War I, World War II, you can tell us the country's winning because of all the land they're taking. After D-Day, you saw how the Allies just steamrolled through the rest of Europe and taking it back. You saw in World War I how like Germany did try to push its way back, but at the same time had internal strife, and so as a result had to surrender. And in regards to unconventional warfare, what makes it tricky, it's just a slow trickle of it all. So like if you look at the Chinese communists and their victory, it was a slow trickle up. In regards to Hamas, what's been very interesting and what the research that I've done against Hamas, it's interesting is that the goal for in some insurgents is, well, not some, all, It's to degrade or delegitimize. Sorry, tongue twister. Delegitimize Israel's forces, and they have been doing a successful job in doing that. Granted, while Israel has been making like good ground offensive, because of what has been going on, how heavily criticized Israel is on the national world stage, Hamas is focusing more on that. Given the fact that the IDF has the backing of the United States, other major allies, it has one of the strongest militaries in the Middle East, Hamas knows it can't win against that. So as a result, it's going to do its best to, quote, fight against the occupation. It's one of their PDFs, Al-Qassam flood, Al-Qassam flood. That's what they were kind of saying, that they're going to continue the resistance. It's very, very difficult to, quote, completely defeat or wipe out an insurgent group. You kind of have to eliminate the forces around that created the insurgent group. So like economy is bad, political maneuvering, all those other things. What counterinsurgency operations takes a long time to do, because you have to degrade insurgent capabilities by, in a sense, trying to make the life, quote, better for other individuals. I think General Petraeus, I think one of his strategies was clear, build, and hold. That's one of the criticisms that a lot of we got about Afghanistan, where we try to conduct nation building operations, but nation building operations was to enhance the legitimacy of the Afghan government and also kind of show to the people like, hey, if you side with us, we will build and make your life better. And in regards to like the Taliban, if you let them back in, they're not going to make your life better, so you side with us. And trying to also relate it to another aspect is like the Mexican cartels. I was reading an article kind of discussing about this. It's interesting is because there has been a hardcore unity or support for them, because the civilians, I forgot what city this was, but because you had smaller cartels kind of go in and take over, every time when someone knocked at the door, if they had to pay money, but because there were so many weaker cartels, they had to continue to pay the money. When the bigger New Jalisco came in, they felt more safe and they owe their loyalties to them. And so in wrapping, why am I bringing this up? That example is primarily one of the biggest issues with insurgent warfare. It's like the hearts and minds of the people that you have to fight. Israel needs to make the case that the people should side with us and not with Hamas. And that's going to be a very big problem that they have to find out. That's the one thing with counterinsurgents. They need to, in a sense, prove to the population that they should side with us and not with insurgents.
Yeah, I feel like that is their biggest issue, is how do you de-radicalize the population, which is perfect because that is the next question. What does Israel need to do to de-radicalize the people of Palestinians?
It would not be very popular solutions, but I remember, I think Benjamin Netanyahu said in one of his solutions was take over Gaza and take over the education system. I feel like that would be the best way. It would take a while, but taking over the education system is honestly the best way to, quote, de-radicalize individuals. It's going to be very difficult given the fact that the history of conflict, this has been going on for decades, if not a century at this point. It's even right now, I'm trying to find like some sort of solution or ways around it. But at the end of the day, there's like, currently right now, I don't see any stronger solutions other than to get involved in the education of the next generation of Palestinians.
How do you fight the point of being that, like, we've seen this in the past with like re-education camps where you try to teach people not to hate you, and we see how those end up being bad? Like, how do you reconcile that point internally?
Yeah, I would not okay, education camps are like re-education camps are something completely different. It's not that at all. It's like more of like, hey, if there's schooling around, like I would say take advantage of that. Try to control the media like as best as possible. I would not force individuals, obviously, but this is like one of the biggest difficulties involved. It's the like, how do you de-radicalize the population? One solution is to kind of show who can provide you the best safety and security. So if Israel comes in, if they rebuild Gaza, if they make it way better for the civilian life, if they have actual evidence of like, hey, our lives are better under the IDF rather than when Hamas was in charge, maybe that could be one way of convincing the population. But at the same time, given the fact of the amount of collateral damage that's been going on and the amount of suffering, it's going to be difficult.
The audience won't know this, but you will. Before this, we tried to set up a few discussions with someone on the pro-Palestinian side, but every time I tried to make these conversations get set up, they would try to well, I don't want to say it like that. Let me try to think of better wording. They just wouldn't be encouraged to talk to someone on the
Mhm.
pro-Israel side. I did before this though pick up one question that they did want to ask, and is,
Okay.
do you feel like there is a genuine issue? Well, here was actually their question word for word. How do you view the disproportionate attacks of Israel against Gaza and with the West Bank? And how do you view the war crimes being used in the war? And how do you think that's going to go after that? Like, what do you see happening with those?
So for me, I think one of my first articles when I talked about the Israel-Palestine thing in my blog was I discovered the Dahiyya Doctrine. So following the Lebanon War, what was unfortunately discovered was that if there was disproportionate amount of casualties, it would kind of be an incentive to tell people to stop attacking us. However, while that worked in Lebanon, it's not working here for obvious reasons because of the massive backlash among the public. And insurgent warfare, if again, the counterinsurgents have the responsibility to make sure that they don't cause too much, damage as a result. In regards to the war crimes that have been committed against Israel, I mean, it's very vague, very vague. Like, do you know specifically what war crimes they were referring to by any chance?
That was the question I got. I'm trying to think of what was in the media at that time. If I could think of anything, I know there was a video. Do you probably know this too? I don't even know if this is a real video, so I'm just talking it from guessing from thin air.
Right.
There was the video of the bombing in like the white cloud, and people tried to claim that was the phosphorus gas, white phosphorus.
White phosphorus?
Yeah, I bet that's what it's portraying to, and probably the claim that Israel uses human shields is another big one. So how do you reconcile those two claims? Is what I would personally think they're talking
So
about.
the white, if it's the video we're talking about, I think that was disproven to be in very, very old footage. I remember reading an article about this on Monday, and again, like back to our early conversation, there's so much misinformation in regards to war crimes that are being purposely committed. I need to know specifically what. Um, Even though I would consider myself, with my own bias, I am pro-Israel. I'm not oblivious to the fact that there have been unfortunate circumstances where IDF soldiers have committed war crimes. I remember seeing one. I don't know why you would record yourself doing this, but I did see an IDF soldier. He flashbanged a mosque as they were praying, and I'm like, okay, that's a violation. It's just that one of the biggest difficulties, and again, when you treat war like a sport, a lot of people dismiss what their side is doing and kind of condemn the other side. For me, it's like, look, if you commit a war crime, you need to be held accountable regardless of who you are, what you are. The war crimes that have been committed on Israel's side and Hamas's side, it all needs to be brought up to the ICC and ICJ, and those individuals need to be held accountable for their actions. In regards to the disproportionate, that's one of their military doctrines, but I think following after this war, I'm pretty sure they're going to have to revise their doctrine, as always, following the war, because they're starting to realize the public backlash and the international backlash as well has been so great. Um, that's what I would argue.
Yeah, I feel like it's very ironic to bring up war crimes and speaking, because like speaking of disproportionate, like the number of war crimes on each side, I would personally make the claim that I feel like you can make a way stronger case for war crimes being committed from Hamas with like the sexual assault they have done during October 7th. There's so many more, like there's way more foundational evidence behind that than like the claims that there are on Israel's side.
Well, I think it's interesting. Even by Hamas's own admission, they admitted that there were some mistakes being made on October 7th. And here's the thing with insurgents, they always try to like find a way to kind of goad like counterinsurgents to do something crazy. So I mean, I'll give like a good analogy. Like imagine it's like there's a big bully, but you can't hit him because you're small and weak. However, you kind of want to take him down a peg. So you kind of like annoy him, you kind of poke on him, and then he punches you in the face, and as a result, he looks bad because he's way bigger than you, and obviously he looks bad because you just hit back. That happens all the time in regards to insurgent warfare. It's interesting that the paradox, like among scholars, that insurgents have the luxury to kill civilians, but counterinsurgents don't. And in regards to October 7th, that was one way to do it, to kind of goad Israel into attacking. But because it was just wanton mess of like violently just killing everybody left and right with like no restraint, that did serve against Hamas's favor. And you do have video footage of them kidnapping people being shot in bathroom stalls, like porta potties. And if I were to bring up an example of this being done in a sense of restraint during the Battle of Algiers with the FLN, when during that battle, it wasn't just the FLN insurgents didn't say kill everybody on sight. It was men from 18 to 40s, kill them, but leave the women, children, and elderly alone. As a result, that definitely did help out their legitimacy, because all they could argue was we were attacking military-aged males that posed a threat to us, as opposed to Hamas, where they were just killing everybody left and right. And with the UN Commission report being released, yeah, that there is that. What I think also does not help with the discourse is that people that have been, again, treating sport like a team, people that have been pro Hamas have been just dismissive of the UN article or the UN case, where I'm like, I don't find that favorable or good.
Yeah, now let's to close the book on Israel. I feel like that was a good point to make. But now let's move to the other major military engagement we have going on with Ukraine and Russia. Again, let's start off with the major question. This one's a little easier because this isn't one of the most complex
Yeah.
issues. But what's your summary on what's going on there?
Well, I think it's pretty interesting is that Ukraine got the heads up notice. Ukraine has been aware and been training for this. What has been interesting is that it's flip-flopped, honestly, because here's the thing: when it comes to Israel and Palestine, Israel is doing great on the ground, way bad in regards to information warfare. On the other side, Ukraine is like, it's doing like decently. I wouldn't say it's the best, it's not good, but it's doing great with information warfare. In regards to this whole conflict, I always have issue. Well, they say that Russia is winning. On the tactical level, yes, granted, you have some victories, and yeah, they are trying to bleed Ukraine dry. But if you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, we have Sweden, Finland joining in. So now Russia has to worry about that longer northern border. The Baltic Sea is completely locked. You have now, like just a few days ago, you have insurgent forces, no ties to Ukraine, but they do identify as Russian, where they want the war to stop. To my knowledge, from what I saw, what they're trying to stop by going into Russia, committing excursions and raids. You also have ISIS that came out of nowhere and they're bombing and they're attacking Russia. You have all these internal external divisions and strifes with Russia. I don't see a case for that Russia quote winning this war. Now, granted, Ukraine is on the verge of running out of ammunition from what I saw in the news. One of the biggest difficulties that Ukraine has is they need to continue to argue to get more funding, because unlike Israel Palestine, this is a conventional war. Numbers, unfortunately, at this point do matter, where they're going to need more funding, more artillery, more troops. And at this point, if you're like around 2 years into the war, at this point, it's just more like whose side's going to falter first? Is it going to be Ukraine or is it going to be Russia?
Yeah, and when it comes to that, we do see the point, especially in America, of how long do we stay in this? Because obviously, it has to be a point where you do think that you have to slow down, but also you can't slow down too soon, right? I feel like people think that this war might go on forever, but as you said, it's only been like 2 years, right? Like this is not a very long war conventionally when you think of the grand scheme of all the other wars that we've had in the past. So how
Yeah.
do you think that, like, at what point do you think America has to start looking to pull out, and what timetable do you think that should be, and do you think America should be funding this?
One of the biggest difficulties about being the world's hegemonic power following the Cold War is that we are the world's security and the world's police, and we are responsible for everything. America's bread and butter of being the hegemonic power is safety and stability and security. Nations do flock to us because we provide that for them. One of the biggest issues with Ukraine and Russia is now they're trying to tempt and try to stretch out the United States as best as they can, because if the United States stops funding the Ukraine, it could potentially signal to other NATO allies that America is untrustworthy, that we can't provide safety and security for them. It has been difficult in regards to that aspect. I think one of the other biggest issues in regards to having a pullout is like what's going to be advantageous to Washington and what's going to be advantageous to Moscow in regards to like this whole entire conflict. A pullout, I mean, we don't have, well, we do have individuals assist volunteering for the Foreign Legion, but in regards to actual US troops, there hasn't been, to my knowledge, actual US troops. And given the fact that President Putin has several times said that he was going to initiate nuclear strikes should this continue forward, I don't think it would be advantageous for us to put boots on ground. That being said, we have to look at the long-term strategy of everything. The Anaconda plan in Civil War, it didn't happen like overnight. Like they were trying to choke the South in regards for their resources because they primarily use cotton. With Russia, they are trying to do the same thing with their sanctions, and the ruble has crashed significantly. Now, granted, that like there have been arguments made that the sanctions are working, but you have to look at the long run of what's going to happen. And in the long run, assuming the worst, that if Russia was able to seize Ukrainian territory, now here's the biggest problem. All those things that you just blew up and tore down, now you have to rebuild all that. Not only do you have to rebuild on that, you need more soldiers to keep and maintain the stability. But also at the same time, with Finland joining, with other nations joining NATO, I don't see Russia currently winning. I do see like continuous support would help, but also at the same time, I do think not putting troops on ground in Ukraine that wouldn't be advantageous. I would argue have training troops within NATO borders. Like I know Great Britain has done it where Ukrainian fighters will be sent over to that country to train up and then be sent back on the front lines. I feel like that would be way better to train up their soldiers, then put them on the ground. Would be, in my opinion, a little more advantageous than just current foreign aid at the moment.
Yeah, with what we're seeing, I like how we talked about that with like Russia. We just see how they're just being like hit from every side. Like what you said with ISIS, with the new like insurgent, I think what was it called, like the Free Russia Group or something like that, where they talk about how like outside
Yeah,
of Moscow, everywhere else is being bled because of this war that some of them don't even agree with. And then we're seeing with other things of what is it? Oh, I forgot about it. The country that's it's in Macedonia, the country that was trying to
Armenia,
join. No, there's a country, a part of a country wants to be taken by Russia. I think we talked
Moldova,
about it.
Moldova,
Thank you. Yeah,
Moldova, Moldova.
and we're seeing like how like this is really like with all these wars going on, like the entire world is just being split at every angle and every issue. And so a big point of that was whenever we actually finally got to see Putin in an interview for an American journalist, being as we know, Tucker Carlson, former news analyst. What do you think? Do you think it always is in the benefit of the people of getting that side from a person who the general population thinks is a dictator and a bad leader? And do you think that like we need to hear like what his side is? Because there were some bad parts of that where I think he talks about how Poland was the reason for the World War because they wouldn't just give themselves up to Germany. Do you feel like that could lead to like radicalization, or do you think that that does need to be heard?
I have always been a pro free speech advocate. I like here's the thing. When Tucker Carlson first announced that, I initially thought that it was just gonna be favorable towards him. Because I mean, Tucker Carlson has been favorable towards Putin. However, I do appreciate that there were moments where Putin did look really, really bad, and Tucker Carlson asked some really hard questions. I really do firmly believe that allowing him to speak and give his side speaks volumes about like how he's seeing the war and how like the war effort is currently going. In regards to radicalization, I can personally see the issue is not necessarily that if we allow individuals that we disagree with that builds radicalization, but by like building that wall of, oh, you can't talk to them, oh, you can't say this, well, that's just going to make it way worse because people need to have that platform to openly speak and discuss. I feel like with like colleges, for example, as someone who spent 4 years in this, I think one of the biggest issues that's been going on is that people just been kind of in their own echo chambers, and anyone who speaks out against them as well just unfortunately shut down from society. And so as a result, it just gets worse on both ends. I feel like having that ability to hear and listen is way more effective in regards to de-radicalizing individuals.
Yeah, the echo chamber leads to that so bad. But I've also seen where like also being a part of an echo chamber that pushes you out could also lead you to the other way. Oh wait, there's a story about a BuzzFeed editor who was like treated so badly in BuzzFeed, and BuzzFeed being extremely liberal at the time pushed them into being like actually all right, where they ended up working for Milo's. I don't remember what his name is, but
Milo
the
Yiannopoulos, ooh.
yes, ends up working for him, and he ends up becoming a super alt-right person. He goes on that pipeline because of the friends he's made from actually pushing against these liberal issues. And it's very ironic because when he was first hired, he was the first person to pressure BuzzFeed in supporting Black Lives Matter. But it's so crazy how like different issues can push you down a very different trail, which we see that. And I feel like one of the big issues is whenever you make something seem exclusive, like everyone wants to be in a party that's like has exclusivity. And like when you say, hey, you can't talk about this, it does lead to those conversations seeming more exclusive with like anti-Semitism, where as we see in the news today, well, now it's a really big hot button issue. But before it was very taboo to talk about these issues. So I'm just gonna like, how do you view that? Like, do you think that these discussions need to be had? And do you think that we should push for them?
100%, we should have more discussions. I like free speech because of the fact that we can have open dialogue and discussion. But I also like free speech is because, well, people that are openly hateful, it just slips out. Like in regards to the whole Israel and Palestine conflict, I have friends that are pro-Palestinian but that aren't anti-Semitic, and I do talk to them, and I do see it. I also see people that are anti-Semitic that are pro-Palestinian that the second they get a mic or they're able to speak, it slips out sort of. Um, I don't know. It's just crazy where it's like the charge of anti-Semitism in regards to Israel. I know that has been used as an excuse to kind of like, to my knowledge, I could be wrong about this, to kind of like get rid of like Free Palestine groups on college campuses where I don't agree with. It's been interesting because seeing all this happen in the West in America, well, now like everyone's kind of like united in from that side in regards pro Palestine. But what's interesting to note is, well, there it's a decentralized movement from what I've been seeing because it hasn't been controlled. I remember, I think this was on the East Coast, as a pro-Palestine group was marching around like the holidays, someone tried to tear down a menorah, and 5 people tried to jump in, try to stop the guy because that looked really bad. You also had an instance over here in California in the Grove. They started the pro-Palestine protest, but it started in front of a Holocaust museum, so that didn't look good. And I think it was at UC Berkeley. Yeah, I know. I think it was at UC Berkeley. I think this guy was giving a speech. He was an IDF soldier, so they got upset. But I think he did it at a synagogue or like some Holocaust memorial museum. So as a result, people were protesting, trying to break in. So that obviously didn't look good. Um, with free speech, it does give that opportunity to let people kind of say what's on their mind. And there are people that are pro-Palestine that aren't anti-Semitic, and those individuals, they kind of speak their mind, like they talk about it. What's interesting to see on that side is that people have that are openly anti-Semitic, and it just kind of comes out, which I find interesting to see. There was this one, and in closing this part, I remember seeing this one video about Basan, where this Jewish content, well, I think she was Jewish, I think she was Israeli. I'm not sure which one she was because it had the Star of David in her profile and the Israeli flag. She mentioned that why is no one in pro-Palestine talking about Basan, how she stole $400,000? Well, this individual that stitched it, I mean, she gave a weak counter argument, but she says, "Oh, your people are bombing her," and I'm like, "Wait, who's your people?" Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like we can actually tie all of the few conversations that we had up really well, where we talk about free speech and the election and all of this. I feel like a really good point that we could talk about is, how do you view it whenever you have people who don't have their own opinions on this yet being formed a very radical or extreme position because what they're hearing isn't true? So like with like the pro-Palestinian war and pro-Israel, that both sides have at some points used very misinformed objectives to portray their point with like they're killing all these people, they're slaughtering all those people. And if you hear that and you don't have the insight of what's going on, actually you're going to be very, very pro-Palestinian. And it's like there is a point of free speech, but how do you reconcile that with you can form early minds very early, right? And with TikTok we're seeing that it's one of the big issues. So do you think like there is a point to be made of there needs to be better like limitations on like children so they don't hear all this early, or how do you view that?
Yeah, I mean, I do see the downsides of like I'm pro free speech, but I do see and hear the arguments against it. I know for a fact, I know this goes on a tangent, but I used to be an educator and I left after realizing like I just want to do more things. However, some people that I knew that were still in education, that were female, when Andrew Tate blew up in popularity with it, things were not exactly the best for them. So, there has been like that sort of issue that's been going on, is like, how do we attempt to de-radicalize individuals? Like at the end of the day, like they are going to that, but I feel like if you are friends with someone that disagrees with you, I feel like having that conversation is 10 times better. I mean, for me, one of the books that I religiously read in college was Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals. But some people don't really understand. If you read that book, it actually tells you how to not only be a better organizer, but be a better communicator. And so when someone like will come up to me and they're screaming in my face, "Oh my God, like you're a genocide supporter," and all this other stuff, I smile on the inside because I know because the book kind of explains it pretty well. They don't know as much. So you kind of like have that discussion with them and try to like not necessarily Socratic method them, but I think one of the book Rules for Radicals, it says this up front, that the most dangerous question a person can be, oh, not dangerous question, a statement that can be asked is, "I agree with you. You are right. How are you going to do it?" And I feel like with that alone, that kind of like turns the gears on their head of like, okay, maybe I need to think this through a little bit, because you have these interviewers interviewing people that are pro-Palestine. "Oh, we want a one-state solution. All the Israelis go back." Okay, how do we do that? And then like they just take like a minute to pause and they actually think it through. I was like, oh wow,
Yeah, that's gonna happen a lot with like, people forming their opinion, like what is it, putting the cart before the horse. If you put your opinion before you even knew how you got your opinion, then it's gonna be very hard to push for your opinion because you have no idea what you're pushing for. So if you have already formed your opinion of, hey, I'm gonna be pro-Palestinian, and they're like, well, what do you think of the Nakba? And you're like, the what? And it's like, if you don't have knowledge on something, but you already have your opinion on it, it's going to be very hard for you to come off and convince people of your side because you don't even fully know what your side is.
yeah,
But with that being
yeah.
said, oh, my bad.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no. I was about to call for the close. If you got more to say, though, don't let me stop you.
No. I think it's interesting. Like, I made this argument on stream and I made this argument on TikTok. A lot of people disagree with me, but I say this all the time: is that activism, unfortunately, sometimes it's trending. So back in 2012, Like Coney 2012, that was a big thing where everyone was like, pins, shirts. They were like social media raise awareness and whatnot. But what unfortunately ended up happening was, well, the movement collapsed. But I feel like after like Coney 2012, and I see this on the left and the right, that every time when a big social movement comes up, there are individuals that take advantage of that for the likes, the clicks, the validation, the money. I know that's a big one. And I feel like with a lot of, unfortunately, with Israel and Palestine, I do see a lot of individuals, unfortunately, taking advantage of the situation, which I find unfortunate because there's good discussions to be had around this to get to a better policy recommendation. But they do take advantage of this because, like, it's a lucrative business to take advantage of.
Yeah, we see that a lot where like whenever like politics is a very important year every 4 years, it is. We always see some party that it really doesn't have a good chance of winning, but usually has a very strong voice behind them. So we saw that with Yang, we saw that with Sanders. I feel like Sanders did have the best chance out of all the parties that we do see. It was a really cool chance for a strong third party to make a case, but yeah, we see that a lot where people will just push for something whenever it's trendy or whenever it fits their point. But it's like, does that side really have like a chance? It's like a really good point to make. It's like, yeah, you should be vocal about this, but don't be vocal about it every 4 years when it has a chance. Be vocal about it every year, so when that fourth year comes, there's a lot stronger case behind that.
Right.
But I do feel like, well, actually, one more thing. I do want to say, this might not be the end of seeing you recently on here, because I am having a debate panel come up, which I'd love to have you on, that is going to be talking about this upcoming election year. So I would like to send the invite into you now. I'll talk to you about it more later. But when this is wrapping up the end of the conversation, I know that you have a few points to talk about. I know it's going to be weird shouting at your TikTok, because when this gets released, we don't even know if there still will be a TikTok. But yeah, where do people go to see more of you?
TikTok is one of them. Unfortunately, that is closing off. I do have my blog, but unfortunately, it's still kind of messed up. But Twitch has been my primary place to be at.
And then your Twitch is
Warrior_Insights. I
I'll
believe.
say everything will be tagged. But yeah, so just go to the bio if you want to see more of his conversations. He does have great dialogue. One of my friends actually watches him every time he's live. I always see him in the chat. It was really funny to find out because he likes him, because you are kind of like a news. It literally is like news whenever you have it, because you have every article pulled up before you even hit the stream button. So you could just hit on every point really fast. There isn't a lot of like great time where it's boring to watch when you do see with a lot of live streams.
Yes.
So yeah, so let me end that with a compliment. With that being said,
yeah.
hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.